Well, good morning. It's good to be with you again. And last year this time, I had been here at BWC for 3 months, and I had the opportunity to be able to speak and share a little bit about the vision that Pastor Kevin had shared with me about being one church in many locations and this idea of church multiplication. I was hired by Pastor Kevin as the pastor of church multiplication, and so I kind of had to explain what that was, and because it's not a typical pastoral position, but that's what my role was. And so last year on the, Reformation Sunday, which we have determined would be our multiplication Sunday annually, I was able to share with you a little bit about what my role was and what the BWC vision was to be one church in many locations. At that time, we weren't really in a position to say where our first campus was going to be, and I was kind of wondering if this was going to be the shortest pastoral position I ever had, because I'd been here 3 months and really hadn't settled on a place yet. I had traveled all around the Lehigh Valley trying to figure out, God, where would you like this new campus to be? I was actually telling him, God, this would be a great spot, or God, this would be a great spot, and this would be a great spot. But we were in a position where we were negotiating with a place. We were kind of talking through the logistics, but we weren't ready to really announce it yet. And then, if you can remember, at this time, moving in towards November, Pastor Kevin was kind of seeding things a little bit, trying to gain some energy among us, and by saying, hey, I think we have a place. I think we're going to be able to announce it soon. And by the end of November, we were able to announce the very first BWC campus was going to be in Lehigh. We had the big balloon drop. We had a lot of fun with that, and we got the energy going. And from that moment, that was November, around the end of November last year, we decided that, all right, now we need to pull together a launch team. And the process for putting together a launch scenario where we go from announcing it to actually launching it would usually take 12 months to 18 months. But you know Pastor Kevin, he likes to move things along a little quicker than usual. And so he said, what do you think, Pastor Mike? Do you think we could do this in maybe do an Easter launch? That was 5 months. And I was thinking, well, as we looked at all the dynamics of where we were and who the people were that were coming forward, we thought, all right, I think we can do this. So we really moved forward. God brought together an incredible group of people on this launch team immediately, and we started working, and we had the location. We had a beautiful facility in the middle school there, and God really brought that together in an incredible way. And in 5 months, we were able to, on Easter Sunday of this year, 2018, we launched the campus with an attendance of 312 people. That is amazing, and I'm so thankful that God allowed that to happen. And so from that point forward, I'm just kind of wondering if you're wondering what the return on investment was, because in order for that to happen, we had to raise $75,000. And that $75,000 came out of your pockets. And I'm thinking, well, what's the return on investment of that since that time? You know, it's not all about money, but we want to talk a little bit, just give you a glimpse of what's happened in 7 months since that launch. In 7 months, we've seen an average attendance of about 113. We have right now the offerings are coming in such a way that we're hopeful, and it's looking towards full sustainability in a very short time. So we're praying for that and continued added growth. We have seen several people come to know Jesus Christ as their Savior, and of course that's what's most important, is seeing lives transformed. We've had our first dedications, we've had our first baptisms. We've seen several community connecting activities as the leadership team there has connected socially through the social programs in that community. So we're so thankful for that has been happening as well. Pastor Casey and Annie have arrived to take over the role of being campus pastor, which has freed me up now to go to another site, which I'll talk about in just a second. We have had the Church in the Park this summer, where we had over 300 in attendance at an outdoor event at our Church in the Park on a Sunday morning there, joining with a couple other churches in the area. So that was incredible. And launching off of that event, since it was so successful, we decided, well, let's have a Christmas Eve in the park. And so we're going to have a candlelight service, Christmas Eve, it's actually Christmas Eve on December the 23rd. It's going to be in the same location, candlelight service. Can you just imagine the snowflakes are going to be fluttering? It's going to be a Hallmark moment. You're going to want to be there. I love Hallmark. I just asked my wife. Anyhow, we've had, this summer we had VBS. Pastor Rachel and her team put together an incredible VBS program. We had many kids, 60 kids come, 30 from right in that area for the first ever VBS. Youth ministry was established this summer as Pastor Josh Regard come on board, and they started weekends at Woody's, and that was an incredible opportunity. Teens started coming, a lot of teens from the area, and that is really doing well as they're preparing to move into the new physical site, which we have leased. We released a spot there in Lehighton, where now the carpet was just laid this past week, and there's offices adjoining that through that window on the side there, you'll see. But there's several offices there where now our staff will be actually on site. There'll be office hours, and we now have a physical presence in Lehighton where there's going to be ministry taking place throughout the week as well. So we're not just a presence on Sunday. We want to raise up an indigenous community of believers in that area that is BWC, authentically BWC Lehighton. So that's what's going on. And can we get a shout out to God and to the leadership team of Lehighton and all that they've done and all that's going on there. We just are praying for them as God continues to move and do great things. The goal and my dream is that there would be a church launched from that campus. Now, I was challenging them when I taped this on Thursday for them this morning. I was thinking, can you imagine, could you just dream for a minute about maybe a BWC Tamaqua out of BWC Lehighton or Jim Thorpe or somewhere up in that area? So would you pray about that as well with them and join with our brothers and sisters in Lehighton? As we think about that and what's next, we could easily get into a position where we're happy with that. That took a lot of energy to make that happen. Took a lot of financial and human resources to make that happen. And it's easy to kind of get settled in, man, that's a success story. I could already go out and say, you know what, BWC Lehighton, we're a church planting church now. We planted this incredible new church. We could basically take that and write a book about it and say, this is how you plant a church. It worked that well. And so we are just so thankful for that, but as Paul says, we want to remind ourselves as well, let us not become weary in doing good, for at a proper time we will reap a harvest if what? We do not give up. This isn't about being one church in two locations. This is about being one church in many locations. And we're already seeing that extension happen as Pastor Kevin travels over to Israel. How many of you believed or could have even thought or imagined this time last year that we would be talking about having a BWC Ashdod? Anybody know where Ashdod is? All right, yes, it's in Israel. Have you heard about it, Ashdod? Have you read your Bible? Go back to the Old Testament. The 5 Philistine cities where Goliath came from was Ashdod. Ashdod is one of those cities right on the coast of the Mediterranean. And so this city, there's a small community church there that's meeting in a house, and we are connecting with that church, and they are connecting with us, and that is an incredible opportunity for us. Never dreamed that we would be potentially having a presence in Israel. Right now, that small community of believers is already talking about extending their ministry and starting another house church in Bethlehem. I guess I'm going to have to go over there. So you can put in a good word for me with Pastor Kevin. He's already over there, so I'm the pastor of church multiplication, so I think I should go over there. What do you think? Yeah? So you can tell him that. But that's just one of our extensions. Another one is BWC River Valley. You've heard a little bit about that now, but River Valley is our next campus, the one I'm currently working on right now, pulling together a launch team. In July, the district of the denomination in which we belong closed a church over in Clinton, New Jersey, Clinton-Annandale area. And so it's a church that was going through some challenging times, and they decided that it was time just to close the church. But they have an incredible building, an incredible piece of property. So they have asked us to assume, they've transferred those assets to us, over $1 million worth of property, and they said, can you guys launch a campus there? Well, God can do anything, so we're going to go about doing what we can in order to launch a campus there. We've assumed those assets, and now we are looking forward to establishing a presence there. If God has spoken to you, if you have a pioneer spirit and you want to be part of what's going on over in Clinton, Annandale, New Jersey in our BWC River Valley campus, I would invite you to come along, because we're right now developing the launch and core team to put that thing together, and I'm just excited about that. The launch date is scheduled for next September. So we got a little bit of work to do there, a little bit different than what Lehighton was, but it's going to be an exciting experience. If you don't know where that is, if you go across Interstate 78 towards New York at mile marker 15, probably best identified by Cracker Barrel. It's, you go there, and just maybe a couple miles in behind that, you take that exit, and there's the churches back in there. So we're excited about that and what God's going to do through BWC River Valley. Also, we have BWC online campus coming full steam, and that I'm really excited about that live stream opportunity. We're being live streamed right now. So there's people out there that are listening to this. Who knows? It could be anywhere in the world. Somebody could tie into this live stream, and we have now, this is a legitimate church campus. We have an online church campus who responds to those. This past week, I noticed in our prayer requests that we get every single week, when you do a prayer request and submit it, we get it, all the pastors and staff. Last week we had one that came in through the live stream campus. And so that was really exciting to me to see that's kind of taking off as an opportunity. So we're really excited about that. And then Pastor Kevin made a announcement last week about this church in our area from another denomination. They heard they're going through some difficult times. They were thinking about closing their church, and they heard that we were going to what we're doing is pretty exciting, that we're planting new churches. So they came to us and said, do you think that you guys could help in maybe keeping this presence in our community? And this past week, I had further conversation with them. They have voted to close their church. We are in further communication with them. I've talked and met with that district superintendent of that denomination in that area, and we've kind of moved the ball a little bit further down the court. We're not in a place where we can announce that this is going to happen yet, but God seems to be opening a door of opportunity where we could go into another place locally here pretty close, and it's going to be one of those exciting things that I think God's going to do to provide another opportunity of ministry just here. That's something that we could not have planned. That's something that came to us, and we see God in all of these things. It's not one of those things that I just listed was things that I said, this is what we're going to do if I come here. Because God takes my plans every single time. He says, Mike, you're an idiot. Don't do what you want to do. Don't follow man's plans. Here's the plan, and if you follow my plans, then it'll all work out. So as we find that God leads us, and we have these discerning ears, we need to really pray for wisdom and discernment as God brings these opportunities to us, that we follow His will and His plan and not our own. So if you would join us with that, I'm excited about what God's going to do. As we think about all that in the context of our message today from the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, what does that have to do with this? Well, in my opinion, it has everything to do with this. We're focused on this salt and light passage that follows the Beatitudes. So you have the Beatitudes, which are the 8 quality characteristics that God said He wanted in His believers. In the context of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was at the front end of His ministry. He was just getting going, but he was incredibly popular very quickly because He went around the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, all that area, and He was healing people everywhere He went. So He became incredibly popular very quickly as people brought people that were sick and needed help to Him. So large crowds gathered no matter where He went. And so here in this Sermon on the Mount, large groups have gathered. He's getting ready to teach them, but He calls His closest to Him and He says, here, I want to teach you some things. The Sermon on the Mount. He says, here's the Beatitude. Here's the characteristics, the quality characteristics that I desire in my leaders. I need people of strong character, those who are humble and meek and righteous. If you're going to follow me, these are the character qualities that I need from you. And he says, I need these quality characteristics from you because you're going to face persecution. Remember that a few weeks ago? Right after those quality characteristics, he says, you're going to face persecution if you follow me. So it's important to have strong character to be able to stand up to persecution. And then right after that, he says, because you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. You're the ones that are going to be sharing this gospel message to the world. It's going to come through you, salt of the earth, the light of the world. And so within that context, I want to share a little bit about maybe what they heard Jesus saying when he said, you're the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Because maybe what they heard is a little different than what we hear when you use an analogy of the gospel message and sharing the gospel to salt. For me, salt is something that's in my cupboard. It's in the spice section and where all the other spices are. I can go to the store and I can pay $1 and buy a pretty large quantity of salt. You know, I like it on my potato chips and potatoes, and I like it on my pretzels. And if I eat too much of it, I'm going to get high blood pressure. That's what I know about salt. So as I'm thinking about salt, I'm thinking, what is the parallel here? What is it that makes it so significant that Jesus would use this salt analogy to advance the gospel message and say, this is so important, you're the salt of the earth? What is it that they understood that to mean that maybe we don't today? And that's kind of what I want to do. And as we think about that, what they heard, take that and maybe apply it to our lives. What is it that we can take from this and apply to our culture today that would honor that original message? As we think about the Beatitudes, the character qualities, the persecution that comes from following Christ, and this idea of being salt and light, I wanted to try to find a recent illustration of what that looks like. So we can maybe connect it to us a little bit better. So as I was thinking about that, I kind of came to this particular illustration because it so incredibly captures what I'm trying to say. How many of you are familiar with a little church called Izmir Resurrection Church? Anyone ever hear of that? I didn't either until I did a little research, but it's a small Presbyterian house church of 25 congregants in Turkey. And this little congregation was launched 23 years ago by a pastor by the name of Andrew Brunson. You may start to connect the dots here. Andrew Brunson was a pastor who was arrested in Turkey a couple years ago in October of 2016 during a coup attempt. And in that coup attempt, there was a lot of arrests, actually. There was many military and civil servants, educators, academics, journalists, and pastors that were caught up into that. And Andrew Brunson, Pastor Brunson, who'd been pastor of that little church for over 20 years, was also arrested. We didn't hear much about it at that point. He was pretty much an unknown as far as pastors go or missionaries, which is pretty consistent with how missionaries live their lives. They will go into the mission field, and apart from the sending church or those who support them, they're pretty much unknown in Christian culture. And that's kind of the life that Andrew Brunson and his wife and their church existed. It's just a small little church in Turkey, pretty much unknown, until he was arrested. Pastor Brunson became the face of persecution as the press got hold of this, as it became kind of a political football, and the governments started negotiating back and forth for his release. And as it became a political issue, then obviously more energy was pumped into it, and we started to see his face on the TV, and the story became much more prominent as the USA began to negotiate with Turkey for his release. This was real life persecution of Christians and drama unfolding before us. So it became very exciting, as exciting can be, I guess, for somebody who's suffering incredible persecution. But in October of 2018, just a month ago, surprising twist of fate, or as we would say, an act of God took place, where Pastor Brunson was unexpectedly released. And after 2 years in a Turkish prison, within a 24-hour period, he went from incarceration to kneeling in the Oval Office of the United States with the world looking on, praying in Jesus' name over the president and all the leadership. Don't let the politics of all of this cloud your, I know we're going into an election, and don't allow the politics to enter in this. That has nothing to do with what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is the fact that here's a relatively unknown pastor doing what, don't diminish also what he did there for 23 years in Turkey at being a pastor of this church, in the middle of a Muslim community where he's reaching people for Christ. That's huge. But he had a world voice. God gave him a platform that he never would have had apart from what? Persecution. Without persecution, he would not have had the platform he did. So as 2 years he spent in jail, God gave him a platform where he was able to speak to nations and the entire world, where he was praying with his hand on the most powerful leader in the world in Jesus' name. That's what persecution was able to do. That's a pretty good illustration of what Jesus was talking about back there. Strength of character and persecution, God can do some pretty incredible things. We are called to have strength of character. We are called to endure, stand up, embrace persecution as God would bring it upon us, because we know that God can take anything that's wrong in our lives, anything that we perceive as persecution, and He can take that and do incredible things with it. So we need to remember that as we think about what God is calling us to, when we think about this Sermon on the Mount, when we think about this salt and light message. What is it that God was actually saying to them and to us when He says, be the salt of the earth and be the light of the world? First, take a look at salt. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. Salt that's not salty is just white powder. It's really nothing. And so this saltiness aspect of this is pretty incredible. But what was it? What did it mean? What was the difference there? What was the there that we don't understand today about salt? Well, if you understand that context, salt was the most important commodity apart from light and sun that they had. Salt was critically important to life in that day. There were cities that were located close to where they could have access to salt. Transportation routes were established so there would be easy distribution of salt. How many of you have heard the phrase, that guy is not worth his salt? It comes from that era and that context where salt was so important. There's this word that was salarium. It's a Latin word that means salt money. And in that day, some of the Roman authorities would pay their military and some of their leaders in salt because that's how valuable it was. And eventually that word would be adopted as salary, which we use today still. Salt was incredibly important, and when God used that when Jesus used that as an illustration, they knew exactly, man, this is important stuff. This is the most important commodity on earth, and He's now equating that to the gospel and sharing the gospel message. So they understood the significance of it. What does salt do? Well, in Judaism, salt was used in covenant rituals, and He was talking to Jews at this time, so they would know that this is religion. This is really important. Salt preserves. These guys were fishermen. There was no refrigeration back then. Could you imagine what it would have been like without salt? They just wouldn't have been able to, everything would have been different. So salt was very important as a preservative. Salt purifies. They used it in their purification and religious observances. Salt induces thirst. If any of you have ever been in a bar, what do they have on the bar? Right along, everywhere. It's all free. Peanuts, pretzels, lots of stuff with lots of salt because it induces thirst. And the analogy here is, hey, people of God, your job is to induce a thirst for God by the way you live and by the words you speak and how you live your life. Salt heals. It's a healing agent. For those who have had a sore throat, anybody ever gargle with salt? My wife's a nurse, and I suspect that because I have a sore throat and I have a cold right now, she would recommend gargling with salt, which isn't going to happen. But I would rather gargle with maple syrup than salt any day. But I know that it would help. It's just not going to. I'll endure the struggle. But it speeds up the healing process, and they knew that back then. It was part of what they lived. And as people of God, we are to be salt. We are to be a healing agent to those that are hurting, whether it's mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. We are to be that to other people. And that's what Jesus was saying to them, and that's what they understood. You are the salt of the earth. You are the most important commodity of heaven on earth. An ambassador of Jesus Christ. We represent the kingdom of heaven and God in your context. And that's what they're saying. That's what Jesus was saying to them, and that's what he says to us today. You are the light of the world. City on a hill cannot be hidden, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. So those first hearers, and we understand the significance of light. We don't have to go into a lot of illustrations on that. We just turned our clocks back an hour. And how many of you are going to be happy that at supper time it's going to be dark? This is a weird time of year, and as we move further into December, you go to work in the dark and you come home in the dark, and we have this little sliver of light in the middle. And we can't wait till spring, right, where there's more light. But light is life. If we look in the scriptures, we find everything that is associated to light is life and energy and newness. And everything that is dark is evil and death. And so we also understand that light pierces the darkness. It dispels the darkness. It illuminates. And that's what they understood, light. In that day, every pagan religion had a sun god. They were probably most familiar with the one from Egypt, the sun god Ra. But they understood the significance of this light metaphor. Today, it's a little bit different as we understand light to what they understood light, because in their context, the sources of light were pretty small as far as a variety. They had the sun by day, and at night they had what? Fire. They had a lantern, torches, the campfire, but that was it. They didn't have street lights. They didn't have incandescent lights or LED lights. Very limited. So even though the qualities of light are the same, how can we apply that to our context today? I want to extend the metaphor a little bit further that they wouldn't have understood, but maybe we can apply some of the teaching in a different way to our lives today. As you think about light sources today and all the different, there's one that I didn't mention, and that is laser light. Laser light's different than any other light. You notice that? Some of the qualities of laser light, it's every part of our life today. It was invented like 53 years ago, so it's fairly new in life. Our generation, my generation, is the first to use it. But now it's everywhere. You cannot be in our culture without encountering some type of laser light. If you go to the grocery store, what happens? You scan using laser. If you have a CD player, it is run not by needles. Anybody have a record player that you used a needle on? They don't do that anymore. It's all laser. Everything's laser. Back there in the AV booth, it's lasers going everywhere back there. We have lasers that guide commercial aircraft. Laser enables delicate surgery. Anyone have eye surgery by laser? Yeah. Amazing what can happen, what technology can do. Military weaponry, laser guided, enables worldwide communication. Survey the planets. Lasers can go millions and millions of miles. What is it that's different from laser light than regular light? Laser can, from a relatively small light energy source, the same source that we use to light this auditorium, a laser with much less energy than it takes to light this place can burn through steel in an instant. So what is it about laser light that's different than other regular light? I think that's the application I want for us to take with us. Light, and as it relates to laser light, it has certain characteristics. All light has similar characteristics, and that is light and photon relationship. In physics, a photon is a bundle of electromagnetic energy, and the photon is the basic unit that makes up all light. So if you think about photons going every which way in here, because we have light. So a flashlight, spotlight, light bulb, incandescent light, all this type of light that is not laser light, you have all these photons that are going in every different direction, bumping into each other, creating this energy that results in light. Now, a lot of that energy is wasted because it's all going in all kinds of different directions. But with laser light, it's totally different because what they've been able to do is align those photons and focus them kind of like marching together in unity in one direction, and it creates this incredible source of energy, and it's all focused in that way. So that's kind of the difference between just general light and laser light. As ambassadors, we must pull ourselves together. We can come to church. We can be a congregation of believers, all going around, bumping into each other once in a while, experiencing the warm fuzzies week after week after week. But laser focused, we can do incredible things as we pierce through the darkness of our culture. It can do things that by marching together, aligned with the mission of God and the mission of this church to reach the lost for Jesus Christ through a multi-site ministry opportunity, we need all of us marching together in the same direction in order for that to happen. The world needs people who are salty. God needs each of us to be the salt that He has called us to be, to go into the world and be those qualities that only salt has: healing, the creating of thirst, those things. The world needs spiritual light because the world is a very dark place. And we are called to light your world and our world together. We can do that best as we come together, unite behind a vision, and move in the same direction, unified, marching in step together with the same purpose. And for us, that means sharing Christ in a relevant way in all of our campuses, wherever God takes us, cutting deep, deep into the darkness like a surgeon's scalpel. Paul, apparently teaching the Sermon on the Mount principles to the Ephesian church, states this. He says, "As a prisoner for the Lord, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received." So he's all, okay, prisoner of the Lord, there's your persecution. As a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to live worthy of the calling you have received. Ambassador of Jesus Christ. Be completely humble, gentle, patient, bearing with one another. There's your quality characteristics of the Beatitudes. Bearing with one another in love. And make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. That's what we're called to do. I'll leave you with this question. Are you worth your salt?